Europe is an extremely wealthy continent on Earth. If we look at the global GDP per capita ranking, 6 out of 10 countries are European. However, if we look at the economic data of European countries, we will find that this region is actually divided into two worlds. One side is wealthy Western Europe, and the other side is relatively poorer Eastern Europe. Why is there such a big gap in development between the two sides on the same land? Before exploring this issue, let's compare the economic situation of both sides. According to the United Nations Planning Standards, Europe is divided into two parts, Western Europe and Eastern Europe. The easternmost countries of Western Europe are Germany and Austria. Well-known European powers like the UK, France, and Germany are all in Western Europe. The Nordic countries with high per capita income and good social welfare are also included in Western Europe. As for Eastern Europe, the westernmost countries are the Czech Republic and Poland, and countries such as Russia, Lithuania, and Ukraine are more famous in the region. The division of Eastern and Western Europe is located in the central western part of Europe on the map. As for the economic gap between the two sides, let's compare the GDP per capita of each country. For Eastern Europe, the average GDP per capita after summing up all countries is $11,572. Among them, Slovenia, Estonia, and the Czech Republic have more than $20,000, but overall, 12 out of 23 Eastern European countries have an average GDP per capita of less than $10,000, including 5 countries with an average of less than $5,000. Ukraine has the worst performance, with only $3,726. Overall, Eastern Europe is not too poor compared to Africa and South Asia, but the gap between the two sides is very large compared to Western Europe. The average GDP per capita of Western European countries is as high as $62,180, more than 5 times that of Eastern Europe. Even Spain, which performs relatively poorly among Western European countries, would rank first in Eastern Europe in terms of GDP per capita, due to huge economic differences. There is also a great disparity in other social aspects between Eastern and Western Europe. In terms of educational level, cultural influence, and government integrity, Western Europe is higher than Eastern Europe. Only in the military field can Eastern Europe compete with Western Europe because they have the second military power, Russia. Poland's military strength also surpasses Germany in international rankings. Overall, modern Eastern and Western Europe are indeed like two worlds. As for when they diverged in history, scholars generally believe that Eastern Europe was once brilliant but entered a long period of decline from the late Middle Ages to the 18th century. Before the Middle Ages, Western Europe experienced a long period of dark ages where the population decreased due to war and disease, and material civilization regressed significantly. In contrast, Eastern Europe continued to produce powerful countries such as the Kingdom of Poland, established in the 10th century, which was the largest country in Europe in terms of area during its founding and was also a world-class trading country. Other countries like the Serbian Kingdom and the Kingdom of Hungary also had periods of prosperity. In addition, we cannot ignore Kievan Rus, a country that existed from the 9th to the 13th century with its capital in the Kiev region of Ukraine. This country was eventually destroyed during the Mongol invasion but evolved into Russia, Ukraine, and Belarus, 3 important common ancestors of Eastern European countries. However, from the 13th century, Eastern Europe declined while Western and Southern Europe entered the Renaissance and the Age of Discovery, and the gap between Eastern and Western Europe began to emerge. The European situation in the 16th century was like a replica of the modern situation. At that time, the Polish and Ukrainian regions were important food-producing countries for Western European countries, and Hungary was the main livestock supplier. However, from an economic perspective, supplying food does not mean that the economy is bad. On the contrary, in an age when technology was not advanced, the primary industry could earn a lot of money. Therefore, the reason why Eastern European countries declined at that time was not that they were agricultural and livestock countries, but that there were deeper reasons. The prevalent serfdom system in Eastern Europe was found to be the cause. Research has found that the current Eastern Germany, Poland, Lithuania, and Russia were popular with the serfdom system at that time. The lord owned all the harvests of the manor, and the hereditary serfs who were responsible for farming and labor had no right to choose their profession. These poor serfs were trapped on farms and pastures for their entire lives without the right to choose their profession. In contrast, monarchs in Western Europe protected the serfs to counterbalance local forces. As a result, the serfdom system gradually disappeared in Western Europe. In the 18th century, the situation of the West being strong and the East being weak in Europe was evident. Western Europe had strong empires like the Spanish Empire, the French Kingdom, and the British Empire, while the only powerful country in Eastern Europe was the Russian Empire. Peter the Great, who brought glory to the Russian Empire, had to learn from Western Europe to strengthen his country. Interestingly, this historical déjà vu is repeating itself. The Russian Empire was once one of the strongest countries in Europe but excelled only in military and diplomacy, lagging behind other Western countries in economics, technology, and education. This is similar to Putin's current leadership of Russia. The above is an introduction to how the development gap between Eastern and Western Europe gradually emerged in the historical process. However, history cannot represent the future. Areas that have failed in the past may not continue to fail. East Asia is the best example of this. This region was repeatedly colonized by Western powers in modern history, but countries such as China, Japan, and South Korea have now become advanced and powerful nations. However, many Eastern European countries are still oppressed and suppressed by Western Europe. The reason behind this is related to a major event in modern times, namely Soviet governance in the region. As mentioned earlier, the Russian Empire was a powerful country in modern Eastern Europe. During its heyday, it ranked third in the world in terms of territory, including present-day Russia, Ukraine, Belarus, Moldova, Lithuania, Poland, and even Finland was a part of it. However, during World War I, the Russian Empire suffered a severe blow to its vitality, and the resources of its population were extremely scarce. As a result, a revolution occurred, and the Soviet Union replaced the Russian Empire. The Soviet Union inherited most of the territory of the Russian Empire, and many Eastern European countries were under its control. Although the Soviet Union was the world's second largest economy at the time, second only to the United States, it was different from the United States, which implemented a capitalist and free market economy. The Soviet Union followed socialism and a central planned economy model. The theory behind this system can be summarized in one sentence, namely, one country equals one factory. This means that the central government plans and distributes the entire society's production work. The Soviet Union applied this system to all countries within the Union, and they formed a common economic organization called the Council for Mutual Economic Assistance. However, unlike the familiar European Union or Asia-Pacific Economic Cooperation, Comecon was actually a Soviet-planned economic system that extended to Eastern Europe. On the one hand, it forced Eastern European countries to be subservient to the Soviet Union in economic terms, while on the other hand, it promoted international division of labor and professional specialization in production. For example, Romania, a current Eastern European country, was once a republic under Soviet rule. As part of the Comecon arrangement, Romania's role was designated as the breadbasket of Eastern Europe, with 77% of its arable land being nationalized. For a country to be allocated as a breadbasket, it is not much different from being colonized. Although the local government also promoted heavy industry, the abnormal economic system destined them to poverty. In the 1980s, Romania became one of the lowest-income countries in Europe, burdened with heavy national debt. Most of the country's food and industrial products were exported, and the people could only live a painfully difficult life. Fortunately, after Romania broke away from the Soviet Union, it relied on its heavy industry foundation and turned to closer diplomatic and economic relations with Europe and the United States. Today, the per capita GDP is about $13,000, but countries like Ukraine or Moldova are still unable to escape poverty. Overall, during the Soviet era, the focus was on industrial development to compete with Europe and the United States, emphasizing military-related industries such as heavy industry and aerospace, while light industry lagged behind. Their planned economy implemented in Eastern European countries caused extremely uneven industrial development in many countries, sowing the seeds of poverty. In addition, after the dissolution of the Soviet Union, these countries transitioned from a closed economic system to a free market, and inflation occurred in many places. Eastern European countries have been behind Western Europe in historical development, coupled with the bitter fruits of the planned economy in the Soviet era, leading to a huge gap in bilateral wealth levels. Furthermore, these countries have their own difficulties. Due to their geographical location in Russia and at the intersection of the Western world, these countries are forced to face the biggest contemporary challenge, which is whether to be pro-Russian or pro-Western. Many Eastern European countries rely on Russia's natural resources for their livelihoods but also hope to catch the economic train of Europe and the United States. Their foreign policy is extremely difficult. For example, in the Russia-Ukraine conflict, if Belarus chooses to stand by Russia, it will have to face economic sanctions from Europe and the United States. Ukraine has been unable to join the European Union for years because the EU does not want to confront Russia head-on. However, some economists are optimistic about the future of Eastern Europe. They believe that after World War II, the first development hotspot in the world economy was East Asia, followed by Eastern Europe. The reason is that these former Soviet Union countries, although bearing the bitter fruits of the planned economy at that time, also benefited from the industrial labor force cultivated during the Soviet era. If they can break through the restrictions imposed by geopolitical factors, Eastern Europe may be able to further develop. Even if it cannot catch up with wealthy Western Europe, it can still provide a good standard of living for its people. For those interested in this topic, feel free to leave a comment below and share your thoughts. If you like our channel, remember to subscribe and share.